Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Stephen Kingcast, one man's musings on the works of Stephen King. Each week, I will review one entry in the bibliography of Stephen King in the chronological order of publication.
And this week, I'm reviewing one of the 8 publications that saw release in 1996, and one of 2 publications that were released on the same day. 1996 was an incredible year for Stephen King. March through August saw the monthly publication of The Green Mile, and September saw the release of 2 novels on the very same day, one written by the late Richard Bachman and one written by Stephen King himself. The 2 novels function as a mirror image of the other, 2 what-ifs. What if 2 authors with 2 writing styles were given a premise and then asked to write a novel around it? Because of the clearly different styles, it's natural to get 2 distinct versions, and that's what we get with Richard Bachman's The Regulators and Stephen King's Desperation. I'll never forget rushing out to the bookstore to get these books. I'll never forget seeing the books on the front display and realizing that when I put them next to each other, they formed a full picture. Knowing that between Desperation's 700 pages and The Regulators' 480 pages, I had over 1,000 pages of new Stephen King material to digest, and I was a happy, constant reader indeed. Desperation is one of those Stephen King books that I just instantly fell in love with. It was so right up my alley. And this was definitely one of the books that I was very much looking forward to getting back to reread for the purposes of this podcast. And it's one that I've read it at least once before. So at the very least, this is the 3rd time that I've read Desperation, and this time around I'm still picking up on things that I missed the first 2 times around. But this is a great examination of good versus evil, of having faith in the most desperate times. So I can't wait to get into it, but before I go any further, I want to share a listener email. This one comes from Tina. Hello, my name is Tina Marie from New Hampshire, and I am a huge Stephen King fan. I was looking for a podcast about Stephen King's work, and yours is really cool to listen to. My first Stephen King experience was when I read Carrie in 7th grade. We had an assignment to choose an author to read and then write to. A lot of us read Stephen King and wrote to him. We all got this postcard from him saying that if he was going to write letters, he would write letters instead of books. It was still cool to get any kind of response. Over the years, I have read different seasons, The Stand, It, On Writing, Under the Dome, and just finishing up the Dark Tower series. There are lots of his stories I have not read, but I have seen many of the movies that were adapted from his stories. I really liked his book On Writing. I loved how he put his reading list in the back. I thought it was really cool that he is a fan of Harry Potter. I noticed that he put some Potter elements into the Dark Tower. It was very autobiographical, but also very instructional. It came out sometime after his accident. I'm reading about that in The Dark Tower now. I find it interesting that he would put himself in as a character in these novels. Has he done this with any of his other stories? I can't wait to read many of his other stories. I really enjoyed listening to your Night Shift podcast. Sounds great. I've seen both versions of The Shining. I have not read the story, but I do like bits and pieces of both the movie and the miniseries. I just finished listening to your Children of the Corn review, and it was really funny how you added in the South Park episode. That's one of my favorite episodes. I look forward to hearing much more of your reviews on the books and the movies. Thank you so much, Tina. Tina, thank you for writing in. So in terms of Stephen King incorporating himself into his other stories, he hasn't done that. That's what makes the Dark Tower, and spoiler alert if you haven't read the Dark Tower. Sorry, guys. But no, I mean, that's what makes the Dark Tower so unique, is because this is the first time he is stepping out of his role as just the writer and incorporates himself as a character into his magnum opus as well. So guys, as you know, I love getting listener email, so if at any point you have some free time, feel free to write in at stephenkingcast@yahoo.com. I'm currently recording this in September, and this past summer was it was just a great summer full of listener emails. My mailbox was getting regular messages from listeners out there. So do what you can, guys, to share your experiences, and I'll share them with the rest of the world, to all of the other constant readers out there. All right, guys, so before I get into my review of Desperation, I am going to read the Wikipedia summary so that I will have a basis upon which I can build my analysis.
The novel begins with Peter and Mary Jackson, a couple driving cross country in Peter's sister's car after visiting their friends the Sodersons. Kali Atragian pulls over the Jacksons on the pretext of them missing their rear license plate and arrests them for possession of marijuana after finding a baggie in the car trunk. Once they arrive at the Desperation Municipal Building, where the holding cells are kept, Atragian shoots Peter in the stomach several times and leaves the body in the doorway before dragging Mary over a dead girl's body and up the stairs to jail. Once thrown in jail, Mary meets the Carver family, Ralph, Ellen, and their son David, who tell Mary that the girl on the stairs was their daughter Kirsten. Atragian pushed her down the stairs once the family arrived at the police station, breaking her neck. The other captives in the cells is Tom Billingsley, the town veterinarian and former councilman. Billingsley witnesses Atragian systematically murder almost every other person in the town of Desperation. On the outskirts of town, Johnny Edward Marinville, an aging author riding cross-country on his motorcycle, gathering material for a new book, a direct reference to King's own motorcycle trip, with his assistant Steve, comes to the attention of Atragian. Atragian plants the drug baggie found in Peter and Mary's car in one of the bike bags and bundles them into his patrol car. While Atragian is burying his bike, Johnny manages to get a call through to Steve on his cell phone. However, due to the bad transmission, he's unable to tell them to call the state police. Steve senses that his boss is in trouble, and his female hitchhiker Cynthia agrees that they need to locate Johnny and find out what happened. Atragian throws Johnny in a cell in the municipal building before leaving all of the captives. Johnny tells the others that Atragian is bleeding both internally and externally, leading the group to conclude that something is very wrong with him. However, Atragian returns before the conversation can get much further, taking Ellen away in the patrol car and leaving a coyote to stand guard on the captives. David receives a message from God and realizes that they need to escape from their cells before Atragian returns. After using a bar of soap and killing the coyote guard, he is able to free the others. It's revealed that David Carver has an ability to communicate with and receive guidance from God after a miracle involving his best friend Brian and a horrible accident. Upon some advice from Tom, a group of them arm themselves with weapons from the municipal building and decide to hide out in Desperation's abandoned theater. David uses Johnny's cell phone to call Steve and Cynthia, who are now inside Desperation and were about to grab a Kanta, which is a bewitched stone animal figure, and inform them of their plans. The two agree to leave Steve's truck and meet up with the others at the theater. Atragian returns to the municipal building in Ellen's body to discover that the captives has escaped and promptly sends out creatures to determine where they are hiding. Once holed up in the theater, the group begins to discuss their options. Steve and Cynthia had stumbled across another survivor, Audrey Weiler, who begins to tell the group about how the Desperation Mining Corporation had recently accidentally uncovered the China Pit, an old mining shaft. The survivor's first inclination is to escape Desperation until David reveals that it's God's will that they confront Atragian and seal him in the China Pit again. The group begins to argue amongst themselves about whether they should stay or go. Tom leaves the group and is soon attacked by a desert beast being commanded by Atragian. The rest of the group, except for Audrey and David, rush to his rescue and kill the beast, but Tom bleeds out from his wounds. While the others were distracted, David hid in the rear room of the theater to pray to God and ask for help. Audrey comes across David while he is in a prayer trance and attempts to strangle him. Steve and Cynthia burst into the room and separate Audrey from David, revealing that Audrey is being controlled by Atragian through the use of the Kantas. While the group is busy checking on David and watching Audrey's body disintegrate, a possessed Ellen grabs Mary and takes her into the mining pit. No longer feeling safe in the theater, the survivors move to Steve's truck to try to determine what they should do. David explains to the visitors that while he had been in prayer trance, and the group comes to understand that Atragian is possessed by an ancient evil, a supernatural entity that calls itself Tak, which had been imprisoned in the China Pit mine shaft until the Desperation Mining Corporation unearthed it. Tack has the ability to control the local desert wildlife, such as buzzards, snakes, spiders, scorpions, and coyotes. It can also take more direct control of human hosts, though such manifestation causes rapid deterioration of the host's body. As such, Tack needs to frequently find new hosts to inhabit in order to travel outside the Inni, a well located in an underground chamber that serves as Tack's entryway into this world. After discussion, David, Johnny, Ralph, Cynthia, and Steve decide to go to the mining pit to both rescue Mary and seal Tack inside of the mining shaft. Meanwhile, Mary has escaped from the shed, where she's been being held, and begins to run out of the mining pit. The possessed Ellen gives chase. Ellen's body disintegrates before Tack can catch Mary and is forced to possess a nearby golden eagle. The group arrive in time to help Mary inside and gather some Antfo explosive to blow up the China pit. Tack lies in wait at the China pit entrance for the group to enter, managing to kill Ralph Carver, who is trying to protect his son before the group manages to kill the golden eagle he's possessing. Johnny prevents the rest of the group from going forward and proceeds to blow up the Inni with the Antfo, sacrificing himself in order to seal Tack into the China pit. David, Mary, Steve, and Cynthia evacuate the pit as the explosion goes off and begins to leave the town of Desperation. Before leaving, they stop to collect Mary's car. While in it, David finds in his pocket the hall pass from his previous deal with God, with a message from Johnny written on it. Analysis. Part 1. Highway 50. In the House of the Wolf, the House of the Scorpion. Chapter 1. It's a great beginning, with Peter and Mary Jackson discovering the dead cat nailed to a telephone pole. This, along with the description of the desert, it's enough to create unease within the reader, who no doubt would be terrified to experience this. There's fear within all of us for the unknown, and the unknown is very easily symbolized in our world as an unexplored location.
It's what makes road trips so exciting. There's a thrill that comes along with traveling to a new place. There's a playful danger to heading down an unexplored road or when you head across the country. There's always a chance that something bad could happen, but you move on anyway, despite the chance. It's what makes this opening so effective, because that playful danger becomes actual danger. Not only do we fear the unknown, but we also fear being pulled over. This isn't a sensational statement, okay, or a political one. This has nothing to do with any issue that has been popping up in the news. This is not a hot button podcast, and I'm not touching anything with a 10-foot pole. But I think that I can speak for all of us that nobody likes being pulled over. I could be driving down the road at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, going the speed limit, and see a police car behind me and still start to get nervous. Even though I'm not doing anything, just the idea that I could be pulled over is nerve-wracking. So when the Jacksons get pulled over by Kali Atrajian, who toys with them first, the dread that Peter feels is completely relatable. I feel Peter's awkward babbling that King describes so well on page 13. He was babbling, he knew it, but he wasn't sure he could stop it. It was weird how cops could get you running off at the mouth like this, as if you had a dismembered body or a kidnapped child in the trunk. He remembered doing the same thing when the cop had pulled him over on the Long Island Expressway after the Christmas party, just talking and talking, yada yada yada, while all the time the cop said nothing, only went methodically on with his own business, checking first his paperwork, then the contents of his little blue plastic breathalyzer kit. Though the officer who pulls them over appears jovial, it's clear that something's wrong. From his pink skin, to his comment about being an organ donor, to the strange exclamation of "Tack!" the deep unease that the reader feels grows deeper. When it looks like things are going to be okay for our Jacksons, our strange police officer discovers a plastic baggie containing pot within the trunk. Things grow worse as the Jacksons are placed inside the cop's van, and they drive down the road, discovering a stranded RV with a doll lying in the dirt. It's a haunting image that suggests that there's a story behind it. Why are the tires flat? Where did the RV's owners go? And why had the owner of the doll left it behind? Things don't get better when Officer Atrajian reads the Jacksons their rights. You have the right to remain silent. If you do not choose to remain silent, anything you say will be used against you in the court of law. You have the right to an attorney. I'm going to kill you. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. Do you understand your rights as I have explained them to you? That is great. That is great. He just slips it in right there, almost so quick, and we know the Miranda rights. We kind of tune them out, right? So for him to include that, I'm going to kill you, it's so matter of fact. It's so disarming. It's just a great way to start this book. They then enter the desolate town of Desperation, Nevada, and King does his usual work on the setting, making us feel as if we're there, as this is a place that we don't want to be. Atrajian brings them into the police station where they discover the dead body of Kirsten Carver. Before they can adjust, if anyone could adjust to this, Atrajian kills Peter. And that's our opening. You know, King might as well just drop the mic right there. So many aspects of King's strengths are on display. One, the hook, right? We got a happy couple pulled over by a nightmare police officer. Two, characters you can get behind, all right? You know, we are firmly placed in these characters' shoes. Three, a memorable villain. Though it's only the first chapter, Atrajian has established himself as one of King's all-time greats. Four, vivid imagery. King paints a scene like nobody's business, and Desperation is one of his clear examples of why he's so good at this. And five, the recognizable juxtaposed against the horrific. So like I said, being pulled over by a cop, it's just something that we can all relate to, and then it's turned on its ear. So much of this novel is just King firing on absolutely all cylinders. Chapter 2. And King is not going to ease up on us at all. Immediately we shift perspectives to Ralph Carver, father of the deceased Kirsten on the stairs, and we discover that Atrajian had murdered her as well. And before Mary Jackson can even acknowledge the death of her husband, young David Carver begins to scream at her to get the shotgun. The present flashes back to the past with a detailed sequence of how Atrajian had brought the Carvers to their doom, and it plays out similarly as it had for the Jacksons, with the dread growing thicker and thicker until its breaking point, when Atrajian flatly points out that he's killed the other two cops. Meanwhile, in the present, Mary's attempts at shooting Atrajian goes poorly. Chapter 3. Here we meet Johnny Marinville, and again, King doesn't just introduce the character, but shows how he too is abducted by Atrajian. We've already met the Jacksons and the Carvers by the time we meet Marinville, so it's easy to think that he'll be just another victim of Atrajian, another cast member in the ensemble, but he's not. With this introduction, King is giving us the opportunity to meet one of the main players in the book, unsurprisingly, as he is a writer, and we know how King loves making his protagonists writers. With Johnny, and I'll speak about this later as well as in the Regulators review, King not only speaks about writing, but also about the difficulties that come with sobriety. Marinville is a character into whose shoes it appears King can very easily slip into. Meanwhile, Marinville encounters Atrajian, who King is very clearly having a ball writing. It's terrifying how he manages to have normal conversations with people during which he'll slip in an out-of-line comment that becomes that much stranger when surrounded by the everyday conversation. Whether it's the way that he slipped in, I'm going to kill you, into the Miranda rights, or when he says, why, do you realize that the ratio of drivers to accidents on motorcycles is computed by a road-hour basis? I can tell you because I'm a wolf, and we get circular every month from the National Safety Council. You know, it's just... I can tell you because I'm a wolf and we get circular every month from the National Safety Council. I mean, that's awesome. With this chapter, not only do we get another sense of an unfortunate motorist being abducted by our demented police officer, but King also expands the mythology with the introduction of the coyote and Atrajian's strange language of takala. After building up Johnny's ego, Atrajian tears him down in his most violent display yet, assaulting Johnny and throwing him in the car. While Atrajian dumps Johnny's bike in the desert, Johnny gives his agent a call and prays that the message goes through. When Atrajian returns, Marinville and the writer sees the progression of Atrajian's sickness, a sunburn that's getting worse, and blisters appearing on his face. What's great about the whole sequence is Atrajian's constant critique of Johnny's writing, and Johnny's writing ability. as if extraterrestrial possession allows for a heightened ability to analyze an author's work. On page 108, he says, "You have never written a truly spiritual novel," the cop told him. He spoke slowly, enunciating each word with care. "It is your great, unrecognized failing, and it is at the center of your petulant, self-indulgent behavior. You have no interest in your spiritual nature. You mock the God who created you, and by doing so, you mortify your own pneuma and glorify the mud, which is your sarx. Do you understand me?" It continues with Atrajan hacking up flesh and Marinville noticing the coyotes lining the streets, animal sentries of their monstrous alpha. Chapter 4. This chapter introduces us to Steve Ames and Cynthia, who, when rereading Desperation for, like I said, maybe the third time, I realized was the Cynthia from Rose Matter. I really don't remember that when Desperation first came out. Probably because I had already forgotten Rose Matter. Regardless, it was one of those Easter eggs that I absolutely love, and it was fun to catch back up with this character. And as for the characters, they settle into a relationship with each other very nicely, and not remembering their ultimate fates as I read this, I really worried for them as they head to Desperation to find Johnny Marinville. Chapter 5. We check back in with the prisoners of Desperation, and Atrajan is drawn to David. Something about him makes him curious, though with what King is giving us so far, the religious piece that it is, we shouldn't be surprised when it's revealed that David is a conduit to a higher force. The two have a great scene in which David stands his ground against the possessed police officer, and Atrajan tells him that he has eagle eyes, foreshadowing to the moment later when Tack possesses the body of an eagle. We learn of David in a powerful and moving vignette in which his best friend is hit by a car, and as David begins to grasp the unfortunate truths of this world, each awful reality is met with a hopeful one as well. He is in a coma, but David is convinced he's in there, just trapped, a foil for the evil Tack. Later, he finds a candy wrapper which convinces him of a divine hand that was meant to find this candy wrapper to remind him of his friend. And when haven't we found the divine in the everyday? It's a beautifully rendered scene of faith and sets David up as the counterpoint to the power of Tack. In the present... Maybe! Hey! In the present, after praying, he hears a voice within his head tell him two words. The soap. What soap in question? Irish Spring. Which brings us to today's sponsor, Irish Spring. With not one but two deodorants, Irish Spring gets a strong man fresh.
You're a strong man, Brian.
Aye, am I too strong?
Then shower up with Irish Spring.
Ah, the double deodorant soap.
The very one to get a strong man fresh. Look, and these green and white stripes are two deodorants to get a man fresh and clean.
What a fine, fresh scent.
That's why I use it too.
Irish Spring, with two deodorants.
Gets a strong man fresh.
When we check back in with Atrajan, who is deteriorating under the strain of Tack's possession, though we don't know this yet, it makes for an intriguing reading experience trying to piece together what's occurring. A maniac cop who seems to be rotting, speaking in a strange language, wild animals seemingly under his command. At this point, readers aren't just sticking around to figure out how the characters will escape the threat of Atrajan, but are also sticking around to figure out exactly what is happening and why he appears to be an expanding, growing, and more blood-drenched with every passing minute. After Marinville stands up to him, Atrajan calls the vultures to scare him and the reader quite effectively. Then through Doc Billingsley, we learn a little bit more about the cop, learning, for instance, for the first time that his name is Kali Atrajan, and that whatever is causing him to do this is causing him to grow. Part 2. Desperation. In these silences, something may rise. Chapter 1. Atrajan arrives with Johnny and forces Ellie Carver to leave her cell. The tension grows because we don't know what he's going to do to her. He's so unpredictable that he could do anything, and David and Atrajan face off once again. And Trajan mocks his religion and states, "Do all the praying you want, David, but don't expect it to do you any help. Your God isn't here any more than he was with Jesus when Jesus hung dying on the cross with flies in his eyes." Tack! And Trajan leaves with Ellie, and in his stead sits a coyote to keep an eye on the prisoners, and while the prisoners argue among each other, David hears the voice reminding him about the soap. Specifically Irish Spring, which keeps you clean as a whistle with its fresh, cool Irish scent.
Fresh and clean as a whistle. That's Irish Spring. Fresh and clean as a whistle.
Irish Spring's green and white stripes have 2 truly effective deodorants. 2 deodorants.
And a fine fresh scent. So you're fresh and
Clean as a whistle.
that's Irish Spring deodorant soap. Gets you fresh and clean as a whistle.
Irish Spring offers a full line of body washes and soap. Irish Spring, the official sponsor of the Stephen Kingcast. David realizes what he has to do, so regardless of the monstrous coyote, he strips down and uses the soap to lather himself up. Cynthia and Steve, meanwhile, arrive at the Desperation mining core. As they explore, they discover an aquarium in whose tank sits a severed hand. Cynthia has to plead with Steve to call the police from this building rather than heading straight to the police because of her bad feeling, and this more than justifies that feeling. Meanwhile, Ellie is dragged through the town by Atrajan, who is rapidly falling apart and even pulls his tongue out of his mouth. He drags her into the pit. Chapter 2. In an incredibly intense sequence, brought to you by Irish Spring, David lubes up and slips between the bars while the other prisoners do what they can to occupy the coyote. There's a tense moment when David makes it through only to find out that his head can't fit. When we think that he's done for, that the coyote is going to turn its gaze on him and attack him while he's stuck, he manages to get his head through and away from the coyote before it can get to him. Cynthia and Steve discover that the bodies of the miners, as well as the artifact, a horrible rendition of a creature with components of an alligator, wolf, and a snake. David displays more bravery as he makes his way to the police station, first encountering the body of the dead sister that he takes a few minutes to mourn, and then ultimately discovering Jim Reed, the town sheriff, and takes his key card and his gun and makes his way back upstairs. Chapter 3. On the other side of the door, David prepares the other prisoners with the fact that he has the gun and is ready to shoot. Clearly, David's father, Ralph, is very concerned and wants him to run. During this moment, David displays a strong sense of self, faith, and confidence. It's a tense scene with an unpredictable ending. David takes control of the situation when he opens the door and very easily shoots the waiting coyote. But even though he's a coyote killer and empowered by faith, Stephen King reminds us that he's still just a boy, and when he returns and sees his father, he breaks down crying. It's a great reminder of what faith can do for us while reminding us that we are always still human. And King also reminds us what this is about, what his books are always about. And that's the people he writes. And when David kisses the puffy place on the left side of his father's face, Ralph Carver cries out in pain and joy at the same time. Johnny thought it was one of the most extraordinary sounds he ever heard in his life, and one you could never convey in a book. The quality of it, like the expression on Ralph Carver's face as he looked into his son's face. Okay, it would always be just out of reach. Our prisoners now escaped, explore the police and fire stations for anything that they can find that will help them out. While they're there, Johnny and Mary have a conversation about the brutality of the cop, and King writes, "And you're not even touching the rest of it, Mary, you thought. He's not just a serial killer. He's the Bram Stoker version of Dr. Dolittle." By now, just in case you have forgotten that the cop is not the only source of terror in this town, Steve and Cynthia, having just arrived to the town to find a house, only discover that the family that lives within are now all dead due to numerous rattlesnake bites. The rattlesnakes, they see, are still in the house along with them. We have seen coyotes, we've seen vultures, and now we can add rattlesnakes to the list of dangerous desert animals that Kali Atreides commands. They escape the rattlesnakes, but when they leave, their car is attacked by vultures that dive bomb them. Steve and Cynthia try to unpack what they have been seeing when they start to remember the artifact that they found in the mining corporation Quonset hut. The artifact produces strange feelings, the likes of which they are unprepared for, and almost overpowers them. The intermingling here of sex and violence and power within this scene is something that you would more likely experience reading a Clive Barker novel. It shows the more disturbing aspects of the book's nature and sets it up to highlight the faith that David has. There's a purity within the force that David represents, and this artifact goes to show the lower qualities that Tak represents. Things get even weirder. While still in the truck, they were approached by a timber wolf, flanked by coyotes, and rows of scorpions marching in line. The wolf holds in its jaws the artifact, which it then puts down in front of the truck. The power emanates from the artifact and overpowers their senses. Okay, and all of the willpower they have runs out as the artifact just overpowers them, and they're ready to succumb to whatever desires that possess them. Thankfully, they're saved at the last minute by David, who finds Johnny's cell phone and, filled with the power of God, is able to make a cell phone call. It stops Cynthia and Steve from leaving the safety of the truck, where they surely would have died by the wolf. We then learn the language that Kali Atreides has been speaking. It's called the language of the dead. The coyotes scatter once David says a quick prayer, and the coyotes run from his force. Chapter 5. As the characters take a breath and head to the old movie theater, they question the central mysteries of the novel itself. And they question why Tak has imprisoned them while he has killed everyone else in town. What makes them special while everyone else was not? Steve and Cynthia, meanwhile, meet Audrey Weiler, and then head over to the movie theater where Steve and John are finally reunited in a nice moment of positivity in an otherwise dark novel. We then shift perspectives to Tak, who has taken control of Ellie Carver. Tak uses a stone statue similar to the one that Cynthia and Steve had seen to call forth a number of spiders, which it sends out into the world to find the prisoners who escaped. Part 3, The American West, Legendary Shadows. The characters take a moment to enjoy the company of each other and throw shadow puppets on the wall of the movie theater, and are interrupted by Audrey Weiler, who is too freaked out to partake. Now, don't get me wrong, I love this book. I'm very much enjoying the reread. But when the spiders come back to Tak, and when Tak asks them where the people are holed up, they don't communicate telepathically, which to me would have been the more graceful move. It would have made more sense, but instead, they start spelling out the word theater one letter at a time, which if you've seen Ant-Man this summer, you will have seen the ants do the exact same thing for Paul Rudd in an action comedy. Anyway, at the end of the day, the spiders tell Tak where everyone is, and then Tak heads their way. Meanwhile, back in the theater, David continues to demonstrate his miraculous nature when he arrives with Ritz crackers, which everyone takes turns eating, and Johnny realizes that even though they are eating all of the crackers, the amount of the crackers never diminishes. Back in the jail, Tak summons a cougar and tells the cougar to go find the prisoners. Chapter 2. In the movie theater, Audrey tells her story and details when Kali began killing everyone in town. King uses the opportunity to remind us that David is still just a boy. After everything that has happened, everyone starts to think of him as more than just a child. David, understandably so, just wants to find his mother, but everybody else wants to find a way to leave. This causes a rift between David and everybody else. At one point, David starts yelling at Doc, and rightfully so, and he says, just because I prayed doesn't mean that I'm a comic book wizard or something. And just because he was able to perform a miracle doesn't mean that he doesn't have anger at the fact that God allowed him to escape, but still took his mother. They make a plan to leave on the north side of the pit. They're going to leave the following day during the daylight when they may be able to see Atragian coming. Chapter 3. Tom tells the story of the China Pit. While there are similarities and differences between the characters and events between Desperation and the Regulators, the events of the China Pit and Rattlesnake No. 1 are pretty much the same. There's a cave-in at Rattlesnake No. 1, and Chinese miners are buried underneath. Their moment of reprieve is over, as Tom goes to the bathroom and is attacked by the cougar. If you took out the fact that the cougar was being prompted by a supernatural menace, the simple fact that it's just an animal that any one of us could encounter if we went out into the wild is scary enough. They manage to save Steve and Tom in a sequence that plays out almost exactly in the pages of the Regulators. Now, up until this point, as soon as we've seen Audrey, King has made the point to shift the focus to Audrey's legs and her skirt. It's something that Dr. Billingsley has really been focusing on, and now it comes to the forefront, and it makes sense why. Billingsley realizes that the skirt is too short for Audrey, meaning that she has grown. Now the survivors realize that they are trapped in a movie theater with someone that might be infected with the same thing that infected the cop. That thing, by the way, is finally mentioned on page 451. It had a name since the very beginning, but its name has been hidden within the language of the dead. The name, of course, is Tack. But now it's official. It's not just Atragian. It's not just the thing inside Ellie. It's now Tack. We didn't get a chapter perspective of Audrey, and we get to understand the distinction between Audrey's transformation and Ellie's transformation. The difference is that Audrey is just another pawn in Tack's game. She's just an animal being used much like the cougar or the spiders or the scorpions or the snakes or the coyotes or the vultures. She understands that they're going to come for her, and she is determined to find David before they do. With her, we see what would have happened to Cynthia and Steve if they left the truck and approached the stone idol. The idol is known as a kanta, an artifact from long ago, the time of the unformed. David, meanwhile, has a sensation that he needed to get away from Audrey. Something about her unsettled him, and at this point David doubts God, but not in a fundamental way. He questions the existence of God, and King relates the existence of God to the shadow puppets that they had thrown on the wall. He's driven to pray at that moment. While in a prayer-induced trance, Audrey finds him and begins to throttle him. At that moment, Mary, who is with a dying Dr. Billingsley, hears a voice from Ellen Carver. She helps Ellen get into the movie theater and realizes at the last moment that she's actually the being known as Tack. Tack then abducts her and takes her to the China Pit. Chapter 5. The characters wrestle with Audrey for David. They manage to get David to safety, but the process of possession is weakening Audrey's body, and just like another character in the Regulators, her arm pops off. As a spirit, Tack will use her body, and Audrey realizes the awful things that she has done, apologizes for them, and warns the people not to touch the kantas. David then experiences the always popular Stephen King dream sequence, whereupon he's given a boatload of exposition about mining and a lesson on the nature of desperation from what will later be revealed to be a younger, dead Johnny Marinville. The dream itself takes place in the land of the dead, the place from which Tack's language originates. Part 4, The China Pit. God is Cruel. Chapter 1. Now that David has his orders, he lets the others know that they have to go to the China Pit. David explains that Tack has realized what David has just been told, that Tack had thought that he'd chosen these characters, but it was really God who brought them all together to stop him. David and Johnny have an argument about the fundamental nature of God. Johnny rejects the concept of a God that would put them there in the first place, whereas David does not argue with him that God is not cruel. He acknowledges that God is cruel, but he understands that he still is here to do the work of God. David then explains to everyone the true story of the China Pit and how Tack got out the first time around. We then check in with Mary, who discovers that she is going to be possessed by Tack. It's a horrifying sequence straight out of a Stephen King book where she's surrounded by desert wildlife and rotting bodies. Chapter 2. Okay, guys, let's talk about Johnny. I'm going to talk about Johnny more in the podcast later, but during these last few chapters, he has been overwhelmingly obnoxious. It's a very hard sit-through. Johnny functions similar to how Eddie Dean functioned and how Larry Underwood functioned from earlier books. But his outbursts and childishness during these last few chapters seem less like Larry Underwood from the book and more like Larry Underwood from the TV miniseries of The Stand. That Larry was just obnoxious through and through. And when Johnny is on a roll interrupting David, making fun of David, he's terrible. He's a terrible, terrible character. I do not remember him being so obnoxious. So it's great when Steve, his underling, puts them in his place. We then get a flashback to when the mining company unearths rattlesnake number 1. It's a well-written scene. It's very creepy, but I mean, really, is it necessary? I mean, we've figured out what has happened. I mean, we've been told what's happened, and this is probably a case where using the imagination is going to trump whatever is told to us. I mean, we don't learn anything here that we didn't know already. We cut to Mary who, in a moment of crisis, decides to pray. She's surrounded by agents of TAC, the snakes, the spiders, the scorpions. And as soon as she begins to pray, she hears a voice tell her that nothing in this room can hurt her. It's clear at this point, but there's an energy growing within the former prisoners. Mary's escape from the prison is gruesome. She realizes that in order to get out, she has to fall into a pile of all the dead citizens of Desperation. It's very reminiscent of scenes from The Stand, where they have to clean out parts of Boulder that have been left over from the plague. Chapter 3. We check back in with Marinville, and as he's having second thoughts about leaving the rest of the prisoners. David leaves the safety of his father and fellow survivors to chase after Johnny in order to give him back his wallet. In the wallet, David had seen a picture which had confirmed that Johnny was the person in his dream/vision that he had and needs to get to Johnny to tell him this. Meanwhile, Ralph and Steve and Cynthia head to the China Pit to save Mary. Chapter 4. Similarly, when Mary had prayed to God, she was answered the same thing happens to Johnny. When he's about to be attacked by the wolf, he orders a prayer to God and finds he has the answer to stop the wolf. What winds up happening is he throws a hammer at the wolf and knocks it out. It sounds improbable, and as I say, it sounds ridiculous, but within the context of the book, it makes sense. Now, this is Johnny's moment. This is where Johnny realized that he's been living a life with one foot in the land of the dead, and after David prompts him to return to the rest of the world, he accepts David's God and decides to help the other survivors. King writes, "Help me, God," Johnny said, raising his hand to a place where they were even with his eyes and you could see them well. "Oh God, please help me. Help me do what I was sent here to do. Help me up. Help me to live. God, help me to live again." As Johnny surrenders to God, we catch up with Mary, who is running as fast as she can away from TAC. It's a scene out of a nightmare, and you know the one where you are running as fast as you can, but you can't escape the thing that's right behind you. She manages to get away just as TAC collapses to the ground, Ellie's body completely disintegrating. Just as the body is going to deteriorate completely, TAC spots an eagle and understands that the eagle is large enough to contain his life force, even for just a little while. And that is a terrifying concept. Chapter 5. The end comes quickly as the characters head into the China Pit. At this moment, Johnny has had a vision from God, and he knows what he has to do while David believes that he's the one that has to do it. And as the characters head deeper into the China Pit, the reader grows tense with what's going to happen next. TAC decides to strike. Using the body of the eagle, he flies into the pit after David, but thankfully Ralph is able to protect his son. It's a claustrophobic, intense scene, and unfortunately Ralph is the last victim and leaves David an orphan. What happens next is hard to read. David understandably freaks out. His sister has died, his mother has died, and now his father has died. He is all alone. At this moment, when Johnny takes over, David realizes that God is not going to take him as well. And King writes, "He can't take them all and not let me finish. You can't do that. You can't." Johnny and David have their final conversation, and Johnny heads into the China shaft to put an end to Tack, knowing that he'll be sacrificing his own body. Johnny has his final confrontation with Tack, in which Tack offers him health and riches, and Johnny is able to reject these temptations and do what's right. While in the China shaft, Johnny has his triumphant moment, and you can tell that King is just having fun here when he winds up killing off his main character. After Johnny has poured the gunpowder and is about to ignite the bomb, King writes, "Johnny looked at the brass circlet plugging the hole at the bottom of the Emi. He gripped the handle of the hammer, his strength flagging badly now, and thought of what the cop had told him just before he stuck him in the back of the cruiser. 'You're a sorry excuse for a writer,' the cop had said. 'You're a sorry excuse for a man, too.' Johnny shoved the helmet off with the heel of his free left hand. He was laughing again as he raised the hammer high above his head, and laughing as he brought it down squarely on the base of the shell. God forgive me, I hate critics." Part 5, Highway 50, Excused Early. The survivors plan for the next step of their lives, the first step being that they have to lie to the police. And when they looked to where the China pit had been, hanging above it is a cloud in the shape of a wolf. King writes, "She turned. On the horizon, looking small at this distance, was the north face of the China pit embankment. Above it was a gigantic cloud of dark gray dust. It hung in the sky, still connected to the pit by a hazy umbilicus of rising dust and powdered earth, the remains of a mountain rising into the sky like poisoned ground after nuclear blast. It made the shape of a wolf, its tail pointing towards the newly risen sun, its grotesquely elongated snout pointed west, where the night was still draining sullenly from the day. The snout hung open. Protruding from it was a strange shape, amorphous but somehow reptilian. There was something of the scorpion in that shape, and of the lizard as well. Kantak Kanta. Mary screamed through raised hands, looked up at the shape in the sky, eyes bulging over her dirty fingers, head shaking from side to side in a useless gesture of negation. "Stop," David said, and put his arm around her waist. "Stop, Mary, it can't hurt us. And it's already going away. See?" It was true. The hide of the skywolf was tearing open in some places, appearing to melt in others, letting the sun shine through in long golden rays that were both beautiful and somehow comical, the sort of shot you expected to see at the end of a Bible epic. It's the spirit of Tack, the remnant of Tack, but as it tries to escape into the air, it's the nature of God that takes care of it. It's very similar to the end of The Shining, the book, not the movie, because at the end of The Shining, spoiler alert for those of you who haven't read it, the Overlook Hotel explodes. And then Dick Halloran, I think it's Dick, or it could be Danny, looks back and sees a great black shape, like a black manta flying through the air, and it just proceeds to get torn apart by the wind and dissipates into the night. So guys, before I finish up, I want to talk about faith, because this is one of the major themes of the book here, and this is an unrelenting novel that showcases horrible things occurring to our characters. You know, the Nile is not just a river in Egypt, and Desperation is not just the name of the mining town that serves as our setting. It's the state of existence for our characters, a state of existence which translates into a life without hope. Classically speaking, despair is the absence of hope, which means that our characters are in a constant state of believing that they are beyond salvation from the onslaught of Tack. It's why Trajan states on page 155, "Are you thinking about God?" the cop asked. "Don't bother. Out here, God's country stops at Indian Springs, and even Lord Satan don't step his cloven feet much north of Tonopah. There's no God in Desperation, baby boy. Out here, there's only Kandalak." Now, David doesn't cower to Tack. Instead, he grows emboldened and prays in order to prove Tack wrong. It's why David is such an important character, because although the title is Desperation, his mere presence is enough to offset the suffocating horrors that are gripping our main characters. And David is a fantastic character. In my review of Salem's Lot, I spoke how I wish the novel had included more of Mark Petrie, and here, King delivers. He changes his name and circumstances, but the uncanny resolve within the boy is pure Mark. When Atrajian asks him if he's having fun, David replies, "You killed my sister. Don't ask stupid questions." King relates the story of how David had come to find God after his best friend had been hit by a car. While visiting him in the hospital, he writes, "It was not terror this thought had called up in his mind and heart, but despair, as if the image of Brian's fingers laced together in his coffin proved that nothing was worth anything, that doing never once in the world stopped dying, that not even kids were exempted from the horror show that roared on and on behind the peppermint sitcom facade your parents believed in and wanted you to believe in." David completely surrenders to his faith and knows enough not to take credit or grow proud of his actions when Brian awakens, a trap that Mother Abigail from The Stand had fallen into. Now, Tack is an agent that feeds off despair, and any time any of the characters find strength to challenge the despair, there's always a moment of uncertainty within Tack. Whether it be brave David in a jail cell or Johnny Marinville, who changes his demeanor, which immediately unnerves Tack. The character embodying these two warring concepts here is Johnny Marinville. Johnny is a Stephen King character in the vein of Larry Underwood from The Stand or Eddie from the Dark Tower series. He regularly demonstrates bravery and compassion, but at no point did Stephen King want us to believe that he's a perfect character. That's not what he's trying to do with Johnny. He's oftentimes temperamental and emotional, and many times he rubs the characters the wrong way. And I know that if I was in this situation with them, Johnny would be someone that bothered me. I wind up liking him in the book, but there's times I just want to tell him to shut up. So when Mary does that on a regular basis, I completely understand why. Or when Steve puts him in his place, when he's just being an ass to David, it's a great moment. And then when David has his vision and starts telling the survivors that what they need to do, like I said, Johnny is completely obnoxious. He continually cuts off David, he makes fun of what David's saying, and he just acts like a spoiled child. King has to make him be a doubter here. He needs to question the existence of God in order for him to come full circle at the end. That comes when David confronts him about the picture in his wallet. David realizes that not only was Johnny the vision guide in his dream, but because it was the land of the dead in his dream, that Johnny had died in Vietnam. David forces Johnny to confront this aspect of himself. What that means for the story and what Stephen King is saying is, like I've already said, Johnny is stuck in a sort of purgatory between faith and desperation. He has constantly tried to kill himself, meaning that he is filled with desperation, but he keeps coming back, meaning that something out there wants him to stay alive. There's a reason to hope, even though he thinks he might be hopeless. His breakthrough begins on page 609. King writes, "I won't," he tried to scream again, but this time no voice came out, and when he struck at the ore cart again, the hammer dropped free of his fingers. The strength left his hand. His thighs turned watery and his knees began to unhinge. He slipped onto them with a choking and drowning cry. That sense of doubling, of twinning, was even stronger now, and he understood with both dismay and resignation that it was a true sensation. He was literally dividing himself in two. There was Johnny Edward Marinville, who didn't believe in God and didn't want God to believe in him. That creature wanted to go and understood that Austin would be only the first stop. And there was Johnny, who wanted to stay, more, who wanted to fight, who had progressed far enough into this mad supernaturalism to want to die in David's God, to burn his brain in it and go out like a moth in the chimney of a kerosene lamp. Okay, guys, I'm going to now talk about the Stephen Kingisms, which, as you know, are the tricks and traits and tropes and patterns that you see from one Stephen King book to the next, and the first of which is the unlucky couple on the road. Now, King has a history of subjecting his married couples through torture, as seen in The Children of the Corn. You know they've got a hell of a band, and though they aren't traveling, the married couple from Crouch End nevertheless wander into the wrong place. Number 2 is Emerald City. King loves to use the imagery from The Wizard of Oz, whether it be nicknaming death itself, Oz the Great and Terrible, in Pet Sematary, the tornado in The Stand, referring to Blaine as the man behind the curtain in The Wastelands, or using the Emerald City itself in Wizard and Glass. Here, Mary Jackson mentions that her sister-in-law is on a permanent vacation in Emerald City. Number 3 is the writer as protagonist. As I've already explained, Johnny Marinville is an author. He happens to be our protagonist and follows in the footsteps of Bill Denbrough, of Ben Mears, of Jack Torrance, of Thad Beaumont, Jim Gardner, and the list goes on and on. Number 4 is dependency and addiction. Now, I've spoken about this in my review of The Regulators as well, which also features a sober Johnny Marinville thinking about more inebriated times. Now, in previous novels, he addressed his dependency with characters struggling with their own issues. Jack Torrance, Jim Gardner, Eddie Dean, others. Now, thankfully, King has kicked his addiction at this point, but it doesn't come without a cost, as seen on page 70 in the hardcover edition. In many interviews, he had identified himself as a man outraged by death, but that was pretty much the same old big balls crap he'd been selling throughout his career. He was terrified of death, that was the truth, and as a result of spending his life honing his imagination, he could see it coming from at least 4 dozen different directions, and late at night when he couldn't sleep, he was apt to see it coming from 4 dozen different directions at once. Refusing to see the doctor, to have a checkup and let them peek under the hood, would not cause any of those diseases to pause in their approach of their feeding upon him. If indeed the feeding had already begun, but if he stayed away from the doctors and their devilish machines, he wouldn't have to know. You didn't have to deal with the monster under the bed or lurking in the corner if you never actually turned on the bedroom lights. That was the thing. And what no doctor in the world seemed to know was that for men like Johnny Marinville, fearing was sometimes better than finding, especially when you'd put out the welcome mat for every disease going. So it's about the fear of finding out, the fear of living life to its fullest, which he found was easier to just numb with pain, or numb with drugs. Through Marinville, King comments on his initial rejection of AA meetings, which, as we know, play a large part in King's sobriety. Marinville isn't the only character to touch upon AA, as Cynthia is also a recovering addict. And later, after they have broken out of prison, the doctor and Johnny have an argument, and during the argument, Johnny recognizes that the doc is an alcoholic as well. Johnny immediately does not have sympathy for the character, and too far gone in his own emotion, decides to push Doc's buttons. You know, whether it's the doctor or Cynthia or Johnny, dependency is all throughout this novel. Number 5 of our Stephen Kingisms is the special child. The special child is a Stephen Kingism that we have seen before with Danny Torrance from The Shining, Charlie McGee from Firestarter, Duddits from Dreamcatcher, Seth Garron from The Regulators, Jack Sawyer from The Talisman, and here we have David Carter. Number 6, urine drops in your pants. In It, one of the characters said something along the lines of, "It doesn't matter how hard you shake, the last drop always goes in your pants." Johnny Marinville has a slightly more academic version. We are told in the book of Ephesians, chapter 3, verse 9, that it matters not how much you jump and dance. The last 2 drops go in your pants. Number 7, Bernie Wrightson. King gives Bernie Wrightson a shout-out, with Johnny describing Atragian as having the chin of a superhero drawn by Bernie Wrightson. Bernie Wrightson, if you remember, is the artist who contributed to the illustrations in The Stand, Cycle of the Werewolf, and later Wolves of the Kala. Number 8, villains controlling the animals. As seen before with Randall Flagg, but wolves, or here coyotes, are also entwined with other Stephen King villains like Flagg in both The Stand, Eyes of the Dragon, as well as Andre Lenoge, in Storm of the Century. Vampires in an RV. On page 137, when Steve and Cynthia are in the Carver's RV, King writes, he wanted to get out because the RV was like the Mary Celeste. It was too easy to imagine vampires hidden away in the closets. Vampires in Bermuda shorts and t-shirts saying things like, I survived Highway 50, the loneliest highway in America. That's an incredibly specific image that could be the seed for what will later become known as, to us, as is the, sorry, how did I, which will later become known to us as the True Knot. There we go, that makes sense. The villains from Dr. Sleep, but that image of just monsters kind of dressed specifically like that has to be where the seed was planted. And then we have the Battle of Faith, Desperation versus Hope. Seen before in Salem's Lot, we've seen it before in The Stand. Ultimately, Desperation feels like a small-scale version of The Stand. Both novels involve a very traditional Judeo-Christian version of God and his agents standing up to an incarnation of evil. The God that is worshipped here is very much the same one that Mother Abigail had worshipped, and David functions very similar to how Mother Abigail had in The Stand. This God gathers the players together to make a stand against an affront to God, which plays into the Stephen Kingism of community, which David addresses. What I'm trying to do is get you to listen, David said. Everyone else will if you will. He doesn't need to send his cantas and cantac against us if we are in disagreement with one another. If there's a broken window, he'll get in and tear us apart. Later, when Johnny is completely obnoxious and threatens to leave David begs him to stay because he says if the chain breaks, then Tack wins. It's just another way of looking at Ka. This time period saw King musing on more traditional Christian religious tropes, evidenced by Desperation, but also in Storm of the Century, which sees Constable Mike Anderson, a Bible-reciting lawman, regularly quoting the Bible while confronting an embodiment of all the qualities of the other fella. Here, we have a quote. God says, take what you want and pay for it. And similarly, in Storm of the Century, Mike says, you pay as you go. Number 11 is the car. David finds God after his friend is almost killed by a car, and later a Trajan runs over one of the Desperation residents with a car. And as we know, car accidents, car crashes, deaths, and mutilations by a car have a long standing in Stephen King's works. Number 12 is the rotting villain, as we have seen before with George Stark in The Dark Half. Number 13 is the alcoholic priest. David's reverend is an alcoholic, and this has not been the first. The first, of course, had been Father Donald Callahan from Salem's Lot. Number 14 is shadow puppets. In a moment of levity, the prisoners, after escaping the jail cell, hold up in an abandoned movie theater and proceed to make shadow puppets on the wall. It's very similar to Alan Pangborn from The Dark Half and Needful Things, where his magic power was to turn the shadow puppets into life. Number 15, animal perspective. At one point in the novel, we get the perspective of the cougar as it stalks our main characters. This is reminiscent of large chunks of the novel Cujo, as well as a portion from The Stand. Number 16 is the prophetic dream. David has a surreal dream. This is something that Stephen King writes in nearly every one of his books. Number 7 is Mother-Thing. Whenever a character is possessed by another creature, or a creature is assuming the form of someone that our characters know, King usually will give the name of the person and then -thing. Let's see. We have the nature of evil. According to David, evil is both fragile and stupid. And this is King's ultimate statement on the nature of evil, as we will get to in the later books of The Dark Tower with the character of the Crimson King. Number 19, the monster from outside. At one point, Tack is described as an outsider. Now this falls in line with what Stephen King did with It in the pages of It, where the losers described the coming of the spider from being outside of things. That will later be revealed to be a different universe called the Deadlights. And then here, this functions very similarly to the world that Tak exists in, which bumps up against our world in the China Pit. And then also in Bag of Bones, there's a moment where there is something called the Outsider as well. And I also recall that when Tom is hypnotized in the pages of The Stand, he states that Randall Flagg had come from outside, I think. Number 20 is Vietnam. Johnny Marinville is a character that experienced the horrors of Vietnam. Now, this is clearly something that's fascinating Stephen King around this time. As a few years from this point in publication, he will publish Hearts in Atlantis, a collection of stories about his generation, which involves Vietnam. And number 21 is The Bartering Villain. In the conclusion of it, the spider begs for its life and offers wealth and power to the losers if they let him go. Similarly, here, Tak does the same to Johnny. All right, guys, now it's time for our Easter eggs. Our Easter eggs are the tie-ins and connections to other Stephen King works, the first of which is Cynthia. The Cynthia that appears in this book is the exact same Cynthia that appeared in Rose Madder, the one that was attacked by Norman and managed to survive. This makes Cynthia one of the very few Stephen King characters to appear across different books, including Alan Pangborn, George Bannerman, Randall Flagg, Father Callahan. Number 2, Motocops 2200. Kirsten Carver is wearing a Motocops 2200 t-shirt, which is a cartoon that is very important in The Regulators. Number 3, Inside View. Johnny Marinville was the subject of a story printed inside the pages of this tabloid, and the tabloid first appeared in The Dead Zone. It has been mentioned in a number of his works, but one of the reporters, Richard Dees, makes an appearance in The Dead Zone and is the star of the Nightmares and Dreamscapes short story, The Night Flyer. Wentworth, Ohio is mentioned. The Carvers are from Wentworth, which happens to be the setting of The Regulators. Number 5 is Misery. At one point, Ellie thinks about a book that she had read, Misery in Paradise. Misery, of course, is the novel by Stephen King, starring Paul Sheldon, another author character, and he is the author of a series of novels whose main character is named Misery Chastain. Number 6, at one point, Steve remembers having been in Arnett, Texas, which was the home of Stu Redman from The Stand. Number 7, the Tommyknockers. This is a Stephen King Easter egg that I completely did not expect, and during the point where Tom is telling the story of what happened to all the Chinese miners when things went bad, said it was a belief that the Tommyknockers had been angered, and they're described as underground versions of gremlins. The Tommyknockers, of course, are the aliens in the novel The Tommyknockers. The Wendigo. At one point when discussing the essence of Tak, Johnny asked David if Tak is like the Wendigo. Now, the Wendigo was a creature within the pages of Pet Sematary. And Strawberry Spring. Strawberry Spring was a short story in Night Shift, published in 1978. And in the final pages of Desperation, King writes, it made him think of Connecticut again, and the way the fox came in after dark during the last weeks of March and the first weeks of April. The old-timers called it Strawberry Spring. God knows why. Okay, and then now what I'm going to talk a little bit about the Dark Tower. When it comes to the Dark Tower, I do a bonus episode, but the relationship between Desperation and the Dark Tower is thin. It's there, but it's thin, so I'm not going to devote a bonus episode. But I'm still going to touch upon it, but just not in a great amount of detail. The first relationship to the Dark Tower is the fact that the Well of the Worlds, where Tak comes from, functions as a thinny, which will first be named in the pages of Wizard and Glass, which I'll review next week. Though it's first named in the pages of Wizard and Glass, it can be seen as far back in Salem's Lot, with the Marston House functioning as a thinny or a larger doorway where the fabric between worlds is thin. But the biggest relationship between the Dark Tower and Desperation is the language of the dead, which was first introduced here in Desperation and will be seen again in the Dark Tower short story Little Sisters of Illyria, which focuses on a younger Roland before the events of the Gunslinger, in which he encounters a group of vampire women who speak to each other in the language of the dead. Their command of the Little Doctors, which happen to be black beetles that do their bidding, is very similar to how Tack commands the wildlife in Desperation. Furthermore, this is where Stephen King first uses the term Cantoi. The Cantoi are a race of creatures that we will later see in the Dark Tower series, who will first appear in the short story collection Hearts in Atlantis, specifically Low Men in Yellow Coats, and the creatures that Ted Brautigan referred to as Low Men are known as the Cantoi. All right, I already read one email already, but I want to read one more email that was sent to me from Quinn, which has to do specifically with Desperation. So what I want to do right now is I want to share this particular email. I heard you say Desperation is one of your favorite books, and I hate to be an ass and point out a plot hole in it, but it has bothered me for a long time and almost ruined Desperation for me, so I hope you can resolve it for me. Forgive me if I get character names wrong, as it had been a long time since I read it, and the Regulators has got some characters flipped around for me. Correct me if I'm wrong on any names. Anyway, David uses Johnny's cell phone to call Steve to come to town and help them. After this, they don't use the cell phone anymore, even though David searches the town for a phone to use to call the state cops with. Did I just make a mistake and read over something, or is it a legitimate plot hole? Maybe since David had to use the power of God for the call to go through, God won't let them use the phone to call the police, only Steve, since God wanted them to stand up to the evil? Maybe the cell phone battery died? Maybe Tack broke the phone? I don't think any of those things happened unless I just missed something. I think it's a legitimate plot hole. If you can, let me know. Thank you. Thanks for the help and your wonderful podcasts, Quinn. So Quinn, thanks for the email. I think the answer might reside with the following quote on page 412. Somebody should have gotten away, gone to a phone outside of town, and pulled the plug on the murder machine. No one did, though. Even before the storm started, no one did. Something very powerful is happening here, and I think that counting on help from the outside may only get us killed. We have to count on each other, and we have to get out as soon as possible. That's what I believe. So there's that, and the fact that David is given the vision that they have to stop Tack. So it's not about outside help, it's all about them having to confront this evil on their own. So, I mean, if you and I were stuck in a situation, we would call, or try to call, get outside help. But this is not a normal, strange situation. This is an abnormal, strange situation in which they are doing the bidding of a higher force that does not involve an outside agency. All right, guys. So now what I want to do, I want to read the most important quote from the text that I think sort of brings it all together. I realize that I have not been doing this lately. I don't know what happened, but I completely forgot about including what I believe the most important text was into the podcast episodes. So, I mean, in Desperation, there's a lot I could choose from, as this novel discusses religion and faith, God. But what I'm going to do is go with one of the closing conversations between Johnny and David. It's right after David has lost his father, and Johnny is going to head into the bowels of the China pit to put an end to Tack, sacrificing himself in the process. And King writes, "Listen to me, David. I'm going to tell you something that you didn't learn from your minister or your Bible. For all I know, it's a message from God himself. Are you listening?" David only looked at him, saying nothing. "You said God is cruel, the way a person who lived his whole life on Tahiti might say snow is cold. You knew, but you didn't understand." He's that close to David and puts his palms on the boy's cold cheeks. "You know how cruel your God can be, David? How fantastically cruel." David waited, saying nothing. Maybe listening, maybe not. Johnny couldn't tell. Sometimes he makes us live. King continues that thought in the very end of the novel after Johnny has died. David finds a note that had been left behind in Ohio, suddenly in his pocket with a note from Johnny and God. And he realizes that God is not just cruel, God is also love. King writes, David went with his head down and the excused early past now crumpled in his closed fist, that huge thing still moving inside him, something like a landslide, but maybe not so bad. Maybe in the end, not so bad. The note scrawled upon it reads, Brian, stay ahead of the mummy, with scripture verse, God is love. It took almost 700 pages to explore the mysteries of faith and the purpose of God, but ultimately, King settles on God loving. David has gone through a test, with more still to come, but he passed and will continue to do so as long as he believes in the better qualities of man, gives himself over to God, and never lets despair, known to us in the pages of this book as tack, or the mummy, into his heart. All right, guys, so that's all I got for Desperation, which, like I said, is one of my Stephen King favorites. I think that it boils down a lot of essences of what makes Stephen King Stephen King. It has a gripping hook to it. It has a ruthless villain. It has disparate characters coming together under desperate circumstances and ultimately rising above their petty squabbles and their differences. They form a circle of Ka and community to overcome the evil that is threatening them. It has very tense scenes. It has very great and well-described scenes of horror and terror. A lot of things that go bump in the night, and it's all juxtaposed against the bright light of hope. It's a great one. It's a really strong entry in the Stephen King collection, and I strongly recommend it. Okay, guys, so next week, it's a big one. I'm going to be reviewing one of my favorite Stephen King works. It is the fourth entry in the Dark Tower series, The Wizard in Glass, which is very divisive among Stephen King Dark Tower fans because a lot of people love it. A lot of people do not, because it, for the most part, is a flashback to the earlier days of Roland Deschain. It's a flashback that I happen to love, and it's a book that I have no issue going back to again and again and again. Beautifully written, the imagery is outstanding, and I can't wait to get to it next week. So if you have not done so, feel free to write in at stephenkingcast@yahoo.com. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram and Tumblr and Facebook. And if you haven't done so already, you can head on over to iTunes and write a review, because that really helps put the Stephen King cast out there. So everybody, may you have long days and pleasant nights, and I will see you here next week, where MOON spells Stephen Kingcast.